Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Millennium Pod, a Star Wars podcast by me, Ari, at ari.in.space on TikTok and at the Millennium Pod, all one word, on Instagram. Today we have a very special episode. It is the first of hopefully many where I have a co-host, a guest star, we'll call it. And why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Genevieve. I'm Ari's sister. I'm definitely not as much of a Star Wars fanatic as her, but one thing that I sure do love about Star Wars is Jar Jar Binks.
Yes, you love Jar Jar so much. It's kind of crazy. I was bamboozled into making this episode. She held me hostage. I'm just kidding. I do think, while I have mixed reviews about Jar Jar himself, I do think he's a very compelling character, and it would be a loss, not to talk about him, especially when I do have somebody who does love him so much. So, of course, that is what this episode is about. And what we kind of want to do in this episode is, we went through and watched all of the scenes that he's in the prequels as well as the Clone Wars. And so we kind of want to go through those and just kind of debate / just talk about whether each event that he's part of, does that make him, a good guy, a Sith Lord? Because, there's that theory that's been floating around forever. Genevieve is not a fan.
Dumbest theory that ever has walked this planet.
But,
we'll get into it later.
Or is he just a plain idiot in all of these scenes? So I guess without further ado, let's just jump right in. Talking about the Phantom Menace. If you did listen to my episode about the Phantom Menace, you'll notice I completely left Jar Jar out of that.
Rude.
For no particular reason except that I knew this episode was coming, and I thought, we'll get into Jar Jar and his contributions now. And so I guess it kind of starts where he's almost gets killed and Qui-Gon saves him, and then he's takes Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan to the Gungan village, I guess we'll call it, and that's really where we get introduced to him. Now, Genevieve's not a fan of this, but if you have watched any theories about Darth Jar Jar, one of the big things people say is that when he jumps into the water, he leaps quite high in the air and does several somersaults. And a lot of people think, well, there's no way he could have done that without the Force. I don't know. What do you think?
I think he's just a really good acrobat, and he can just do some good flips into his water. Like, he's probably made that trek down to his Gungan village, probably at least once. I don't know how often he leaves, but let's say at least once a week. He's probably gotten really good at making a show of jumping back in underwater.
Right. I tend to want to agree with you. I feel like maybe that's a bit of a stretch. The only thing is, have we ever seen other Gungans do this? I don't know.
But do we ever really see that many Gungans? Jar Jar's the only Gungan we really focus on. You've never seen another Gungan go underwater. That's
true. We've never seen another Gungan, make the leap into the water. So yeah, okay. So for that points to just, he's a weirdo. So then we see him, and we know he's been banished, and Qui-Gon basically is like, oh, well, I saved his life, so now he owes me a life debt, so he's got to help me, right? And so then that's pretty much how Jar Jar ends up taking Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan through the core of Naboo to get to Thebe. And I don't know how you, I guess they needed a guide, right? So I'm tempted to say that this event kind of leans towards he's useful and friendly. Don't really think there's anything that kind of points to him being a Sith Lord in this particular scene. And also, for once, he's not being an idiot. So I don't know. I would say
I think he just really wanted to help these people out. Like, Qui-Gon rescued him, and he's like, I do owe this dude something, and I've just gotta do whatever it takes to make Qui-Gon happy.
Right.
And
or maybe
you
he
love
was just
Qui-Gon.
trying to.
So I do
love Qui-Gon.
I think you should agree that Jar Jar was just trying to be a helpful person, because he was helping out your man.
To play, first of all, Qui-Gon is not my man. He's my dad. And second of all, to play devil's advocate here, because, you're obviously very into Jar Jar, so I have to take on this role of, but maybe he just infiltrate them later, as the Sith Lord that he may or may not be.
Maybe, but I just don't buy it, not one bit. You can never prove me wrong, I don't think.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, okay, so then we go on, and I don't really think there's much. I mean, he's a klutz when they're on Tatooine. I don't know. Do you see anything that he does on Tatooine as like super important to your case that he's a great guy?
No, not really on Tatooine. No. But he's just that helpful, friendly dude. But no, I'd say as of Tatooine, it's not his spot. It's not Naboo, it's Tatooine. He's never been there before.
Right. Unless he's a Sith Lord and he's traveled there before for fun.
But he's not a Sith Lord, so that argument's moot.
Okay, so then going back to Naboo, we do see him, and he plays a pretty important role in getting the Gungans to join the Naboo people, to kind of ward off that separatist attack, which I do feel like is very important. It's something I really like about the Phantom Menace period, is just how they're able to kind of bridge that gap between the two species that don't really like each other. And I do think that Jar Jar plays a really important role in that. So for me, him, taking Qui-Gon and Padme and Obi-Wan to go and find the Gungans in their secret place and helping to convince that they should help, that the Gungan army should help. I think that's points for he's a good guy, personally.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do wonder sometimes, because obviously he'd been like banished, and you can tell in like certain scenes that the Gungans don't really like him. I wonder if he partially obviously, yeah, I do believe he's doing it just to be a good guy, but I also wonder if maybe there's like a slight selfish quote unquote reason, and he just wants to bridge everyone together and maybe get some more love from the Gungans or something like that.
That's true. So you would argue if his reasons weren't good intentioned, they would be more selfish, but not Sith Lord level of selfish.
Definitely not Sith Lord level of selfish, no.
Okay, that's fair. I guess next, I mean, then we kind of move on from the Phantom Menace, and we didn't spend too much time here now, but we move on, and in Attack of the Clones and also Revenge of the Sith, like his role goes from being a main-ish character to pretty much non-existent, and of course that's obviously due to the crazy amount of backlash he got when the Phantom Menace came out. I mean, I was a baby, you weren't even born, so I don't remember it personally, but I mean there's records of it, and people who were alive and were aware of what was going on in the world at that time do say so. I think that's sad, because I think he played an interesting part in the Phantom Menace, and I think it's sad that we don't get to see him later on. However, there Attack of the Clones, two things I wanted to mention about his character, and the first is when Padme gets pretty much forced to leave because her safety's at risk, she puts Jar Jar in charge. And to me, that's pretty good evidence that he's a good guy, because Padme's not dumb. She's not going to trust everything she's worked for to somebody who's not smart. And also Attack of the Clones takes place 10 years later than the Phantom Menace, so I mean he probably could have learned a lot. So I think this is pretty strong evidence that he's a good guy, because I think Padme's wise. So it kind of comes down to, in this case, do you trust Padme's judgment or not? I do. But I don't know.
Me too.
Yeah. On the other hand, we have Jar Jar near the end of Attack of the Clones giving a speech to the Senate to promote Palpatine to go into power, essentially, like full power. So maybe not a good guy necessarily. Maybe Padme's trust was misplaced, because that is not what she would have wanted. I don't know.
I don't think, like, as much as we obviously all knew that Senator Palpatine was the bad guy, I don't think it was obvious to really anybody. And that's like the main premise of like the prequels, is that there's this big plot twist that nobody really even knew about. So I don't think it's definitely could be an argument. I think it's the strongest argument as to why Jar Jar could be a Sith, but I just don't think that it was unprecedented that he was suddenly a giant, big, bad Sith Lord like Senator Palpatine.
Right.
And I don't think I think in the time of crisis, in the time of war, they just wanted to make immediate, quick decisions that could help the Republic.
That's interesting. I actually never didn't really think about that because I saw somebody say, "Oh yeah, he supported Palpatine, so he must be a Sith Lord." And I immediately, of course, I'm quite gullible, so I was like, "Oh yeah, that makes total sense." But I do like what you're saying in that. Well, yes, he could have been working for Palpatine, but there was also pretty good evidence. I mean, everybody went with his speech and voted for Palpatine, so it's like nobody really knew what was going on. Like the Jedi Council didn't even know what was going on, and that's just a whole other grievance, whole other topic I have. But they didn't really know. They didn't really know. So that actually, I can get behind that. I can agree with you on that.
Why, thank you.
So then I guess Jar Jar really, I mean, this would come after anyway, but he's really not even in Revenge of the Sith at all. It's like I said previously, it's sad how his character just got basically deleted because toxic fans didn't like him. I mean, like I get it, but it's sad. So I guess we'll talk about Clone Wars, and I think that the Clone Wars does a really good job of making him more likable. And they do that with a lot of different characters. They kind of resurrect characters from the prequels, like Maul, for example. And they do the same with Jar Jar. At least I think that his character is quite interesting. A lot of people say, oh, yeah, just skip the Jar Jar episodes in the Clone Wars. But like, no, they're some of the most rewatchable, in my opinion, episodes. Starting with, of course, in season 1, when he is pretending to be a Jedi, basically, by accident.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think an interesting aspect of that episode that, to me, promotes good guy is just his desire. You know, Padme gets taken by the Rodian guy, makes a deal with Newt Gunray, right, for Padme, and Jar Jar's like, well, we got to save her. And I think that's interesting because it shows almost development from when we first meet him in The Phantom Menace. He's a lot more assertive now and trying to help. I don't know what.
I think it just really showed off like his determination, because the minute like that they like him and C-3PO got attacked, he put it together that Padme was probably like in trouble or something, and immediately he just like set into action, and like he climbed a building, he like fought off like a sea monster just to like try to save her. And I just really think that shows how determined he is to like help the people he cares about.
Mm-hmm. And going off of that, there's a point I really want to make, but I want to talk about the next episode of Clone Wars that we see him in first, and that is when Anakin and Obi-Wan are going after Dooku, and then they all get taken by Hondo and the pirates, and it's a whole thing in season 1. I think it's like episode 11 and 12 or something like that. And basically Jar Jar sent with another senator to deliver the ransom for them, and you know, everything goes wrong, of course, which is partially Jar Jar's fault for being a klutz. But the one thing I do think is interesting is that on this planet there are these craters, and they spew out stuff that could potentially be fatal to the clones and Jar Jar. And Jar Jar notices, and the clones don't, notices that when the animals are nearby, it's safe, because they're not afraid. And then when the animals leave, then they're in trouble, and they need to get away from these craters that are spewing out stuff. And I think that's really interesting. And going back to the episode where he pretends to be a Jedi on Rhodia, I think it's neat his interaction kind of with the animals on these planets, because in Rhodia, when he's trying to be or pretending to be a Jedi, whatever, he in a way befriends the slug monster, and where others might have been, you know, fearful of this monster, he instead is like, oh, this can help me. And same with, again, later when he's trying to, you know, not get blown up by a geyser, he's noticing animals. And I think that's interesting, and I think it's telling of his character that he doesn't just dismiss, you know, beings that some people might consider less than.
Yeah, and I think he could get that just from his own like life and his like, he's probably been dismissed multiple times, because I don't know that how much like Gungans are like a respectable like being. I'm guessing they're probably more lower on like the quote unquote food chart, which is not right at all. But and I think that maybe he just is able to relate to like the animals and stuff more, and he just notices these things.
Yeah, so I would definitely count those instances as, you know, he's actually more intelligent than we give him credit for, and good guy. Not a Sith Lord in this case. I don't see that.
Definitely not. I don't think there's really any evidence throughout the Clone Wars that he could be a Sith Lord, just like there isn't really any evidence throughout the prequels either, but whatever.
Well, there is. Okay. And then I guess the next big arc that I think is important, I know he's in a few more episodes between now and then, but the one that I think is important is, of course, the water arc in season 4 of the Clone Wars. And he doesn't do a lot, but he does enough. I mean, they call out for help. The council's calling out to the Gungans for help because, they're overwhelmed and they need a water species with a water army. And the Gungan Council, I guess we'll call it, is skeptical, right? And they don't want to necessarily go help, but Jar Jar makes the case, well, Padme, who happens to be part of this group that's calling for help, would help us, right? She would help them, and that ultimately gets the Gungans moving to help them.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
I definitely think like that, like what he said when he was just like, Padme wouldn't have even hesitated to help us. That's just like, I think that really truly shows his character, because that's just, he's always like goes out of his way to help others, and he always is like, everyone would help me, people have helped me, it's like my turn to return the favor type thing.
Right. And Sith Jar Jar enthusiasts would say he's only helping so he can manipulate people, but I do agree with you. I think it is very telling of his character, and he's kind of like the helpful little hero that people kind of forgot about, maybe. And then, of course, I think this is gross, but it's great also. When Padme's helmet in a later episode in this arc her underwater helmet gets cracked and water's filling up and she's, obviously going to drown in her helmet, Jar Jar, using some quick thinking, realizes that his saliva is a good waterproofing agent. And so he, spits at her, and then, she's saved. Hooray. And I mean, this is kind of funny to like laugh about, and it's a kind of an interesting scene, but really it again shows his critical and quick thinking in a time of crisis. I mean, Anakin and Kit Fisto are kind of useless. They're the Jedi in this situation, and they're kind of like, oh no, what do we do? And Jar Jar's like, I got you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think Jar Jar was definitely, his role wasn't like, it was definitely memorable in the water arc. It wasn't like huge. There was probably like Kit Fisto and Anakin probably played like a bigger part in it, but the part that he did play was definitely necessary for like the victory and whatnot.
Yeah, definitely, especially when we consider like he's pretty much the reason the Gungans showed up at all, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so then now the last arc is, of course, the season 6 arc, episode 8 and 9, and I know those exact episodes because I'm a bit scarred. The arc where Mace Windu and Jar Jar go to help the queen of this mystical force planet, basically, who also happens to be Jar Jar's long lost love interest. How did we feel about that when we watched it?
Well, it was scarring, to be honest. I do love Jar Jar, but I never have viewed him or thought of him as having a romantic interest or being someone who really could love somebody in that way. So when the queen came and was like, Jar Jar, it's been so long, like, I love you, I miss you, and then they kiss, it was scarring, to say the least. It's like on the back of my eyeballs as I fall asleep at night. So as much as I love Jar Jar, I would pay a lot of money to go back in time and never see that scene again, quite honestly.
Right. Yeah. I have to say I agree. The rest of the arc was quite interesting. It's when you ignore what the beginning of it and why Jar Jar was, the guy who was requested by this queen. Again, I think we do see Jar Jar, taking charge. In this case, he's motivated by love, apparently.
Which is really weird and a strange concept, but I think it gives us like a different aspect of Jar Jar. And in a way, although it's weird to see him have a love interest, it's just like a whole nother reason to enjoy Jar Jar, because he's got like this whole other part of him that you've never seen before.
Yeah, it definitely makes him a bit more three-dimensional. I mean,
Yeah.
throughout, like I said before, I think the Clone Wars really helps with that. But it definitely kind of gives him another depth. And as much as you're like, we screamed when we saw it for the first time, no idea. Somehow, a lot of Clone Wars has been spoiled for me, but somehow that was not. And wow, what a shock. But I do think, yeah, again, we see him taking charge, and he can land some good punches actually on some
I was
guys.
shocked. I was like, we were watching the fight scene with like the cult leaders, and then it was like Mace Windu and then Jar Jar, and it was like, because Mace Windu's got moves, but then Jar Jar was like matching him with the moves. He was like got a solid punch, smoke behind his punch. I was impressed.
Yeah, I was also impressed with the arc. One thing I will say is basically, if you haven't seen it, we should have started with this, but these weird cult leaders are basically trying to steal the life force from these other force beings who are neither Sith nor Jedi. And at one point, they also capture Jar Jar, and they're trying to take his life force. And he's like, "Oh, I don't have a life force." But maybe he does have a really strong life force of the dark side of the force, and he's actually a Sith Lord.
See, I feel like I can easily debunk that because the minute he stepped onto that planet, if he had such a strong, like, dark force inside of him, then wouldn't the cultist leaders have immediately tried to kidnap him? They kidnapped, like, the queen before him, and they didn't seem that excited to have gotten him. They were just like, any force will
That's
be,
true.
like, helpful.
That's true. That's true. You make a valid point. I like I said, I don't know how much I believe in the Jar Jar Sith theory, but I do think it's important to kind of play both sides. And clearly, you're not going to be on the side of Jar Jar is a Sith.
No, I think
So
my life's work is now devoted to debunking any Jar Jar is a Sith, any of that stuff, because he's not. And I stand by that. I will stand by that for probably for the rest of my life.
okay, what if George Lucas came out and said, "Yeah, guys, Jar Jar is a Sith Lord."
I don't know if that would have I don't know if he says that, if I will question if that was his like original intention when creating the character or if that was just an afterthought.
See, when you bring up his original intention, I actually tend to be in the camp of pretty potentially likely that it was the original intention, because there is a point or an interview when George basically says Jar Jar is the key to everything. And I mean, obviously he's not going to be one of the good guys because their roles of the good guys are already taken. So I do think it could have been potentially an original plan that was either scrapped before the Phantom Menace at all, or it was scrapped after the Phantom Menace once Jar Jar was hated so much. I feel the need to, be the devil's advocate here, because Darth Jar Jar is such a big thing in the fandom, and people have been talking about it for years. Like our dad even knew about it. I mentioned it briefly, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I've heard about that." And I mean, Dad likes Star Wars, but not that much. Like, so if he's heard about it, then it's got to be a pretty big thing. But so I guess that's where I stand. I don't think canonically he's a Sith Lord. I guess they could have done that with the sequels if they really wanted to, and again, they could have brought it up more in Clone Wars if they wanted to, because all that stuff came after. But they didn't. So canonically, no, I don't think Jar Jar is a Sith Lord. Do I think there's some fun little things like, he was trying to talk to Palpatine and he can jump high and all that stuff that could be potential evidence? Yeah, sure, that's fine. But I think it might have been a plan, definitely, but I don't think it's canonically true. And I mean, you can summarize your thoughts once more on that.
I definitely think that, yeah, there was like a chance that maybe it was like left open and that George Lucas like maybe left some room or something for something to happen with Jar Jar. But no, I just don't think that the evidence in the Phantom Menace was strong enough to like there might have been like 2 or 3 good evidences that weren't even that good that he could have been a Sith Lord. I just don't think they were strong enough for that to be. I think if like it happened in like the second or third of the prequels that he was suddenly a Sith Lord, I think that would have been honestly a bit of a surprise, because I just don't think it was set up well enough in the Phantom Menace for him to be a Sith Lord.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. And I wonder if it had happened, if we would look back at the Phantom Menace and be like, wow, oh, he definitely laid out all those clues, or if, like you said, if it would just be like, what, where did that come from? I honestly don't even know where the origins of this theory came from. I just know that as long as I've known, like, been into Star Wars, it's been a thing. But yeah, I definitely, I see what you mean. So let's now, to summarize, talk about, so the title of this episode is, of course, Jar Jar Binks, good guy, Sith Lord, or just a plain idiot. I'll go first. I'll let you have the final say on this, since you like Jar Jar a lot more than me. I think he's a good guy, genuinely. Maybe some things are done for selfish reasons, like to make himself better, to make himself feel needed. But genuinely, I just think he's kind of that bumbling idiot character who has really good intentions and who is able to kind of make the most of situations to help the people he cares about. I really think we see that, and I think we see it especially in his and Padme's relationship. I mean, they worked together in the Senate for years. And I do think that he genuinely cares about her as her and not as a Sith Lord who can manipulate her. But I mean, of course, because I know you won't say it because you don't like the Sith Lord theory at all. If you're listening to this and you're a diehard Jar Jar as a Sith Lord fan, I think that's great. I think that's cool. I think that's the best part about Star Wars, is we can all have different opinions. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think to dismiss Jar Jar as just the idiot and just the failed attempt at comic relief is an injustice to his character and to Ahmed Best, who acted and voiced him in the Clone Wars. And I just think it's interesting to look at what actually makes him a good character and a character worth caring about.
Yeah, I totally agree with basically almost everything you said. Like, you touched on the like comic relief, or whether or not that's what he was. And I think he was set out in the Phantom Menace to be more than the comic relief. And then unfortunately, with like all the bullying and the hate that came with it, I think he kind of did settle back into that role of comic relief. But I think overall, he's definitely a good guy. I might argue a great guy, but at the end of the day, yeah, he's definitely like a klutz, but there's tons of lovable klutzes out in the world. And maybe he was a little lucky with some of his klutziness, but I think overall his intentions were just really great and wholesome, and that he just always wanted to help those who helped him, basically.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. I think that pretty much sums it up. You don't, no last thoughts, no last words. This is your last chance to defend Jar Jar to the world. But anyway, if you're still here with us, thank you so much for listening. Maybe if you hated Jar Jar, you have a new opinion on him. Maybe not. Doesn't matter. We're here for fun anyway. As always, please feel free to reach out to me via social media. If you have anything specific you want to say to my sister, I will pass it along, unless it's mean. And I hope you guys are having a fantastic day, night, evening, morning, whatever it is, wherever you are. And as always, may the Force be with you.